Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you all for tuning in. Tonight, I want to talk about how I got into one of my favorite bands, that being Collective Soul, and just talk a little bit about how I come to be a big Collective Soul fan, and talk a little bit about why I love these guys so much. So, I was a little late to the Collective Soul party. It was early 2010, and I was working a job that played our local radio station, and one of the songs that they played at the time was Welcome All Again. Probably about once a day or so that song would come on the radio, and I really started taking a liking to it. I really liked the guitar hook in the song. I think that's what really kind of caught my ear, but the more I listened to the song, the more I realized that I like everything. The lyrics are good, it's catchy, the guitar works awesome. So I go home and look it up one night and find that it's Welcome All Again by Collective Soul. So I thought, oh, okay, that's cool. I'd heard the band name Collective Soul before, but I didn't really know much about them. I probably couldn't have told you what their big hit songs were or anything like that, but I was familiar with the name. So couldn't have been a week later. They play another song on the radio that I had never heard before, and it was Why Part 2. And everything about Why Part 2 just clicked with me. I mean, from the guitar lick, I just loved the riff that was so heavy and chompy, the bum 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 bum. Ed's lyrics were awesome. I mean, just at that point in time, it was like the perfect song all the way around. It was everything I wanted to hear in a rock song. And I was just so hooked on it, and I was listening intently on the radio because it was just kind of like everything I wanted to hear at that point in time. And I picked out a couple phrases of the song so that I could go home and look it up on the computer. So when I get home and I look it up, I find that it's Why Part 2 by Collective Soul. And at this point, I realized I probably ought to check these guys out. So I went on to LimeWire, if anybody remembers LimeWire from back in the day, and I just downloaded a handful of Collective Soul tracks. I don't even remember which all tracks they were off the top of my head, but they included some of their biggest hits, and I realized that I do know some songs by Collective Soul. I knew Shine, World I Know, December. I think I might have heard Gel before as well. So it really started to kind of give me an idea who Collective Soul was, and I forget what all tracks I got, but I loved all of them. So it really got me interested in checking this band out. So one of the things back then that my wife and I used to do, and this is back before we were married, we were just still dating at the time, but after I would get off work at 10 o'clock in the morning to 12, somewhere in there is when I got off my shift at the grocery store I worked at. My shift started like at 4 a.m., which was hell for a 20-year-old, but it was nice getting off at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning, and we would just kind of go around town and hang out and check out the thrift stores. So we were in Salvation Army one day, and I found this gem right here, Discipline Breakdown, for $1, and I gotta tell you, that was $1 well spent. I popped this thing in the car, and I loved every second of this album. I had not heard anything on this album. I had not recognized any songs. I didn't download any of these from LimeWire. This entire album was new to me, and I thought it was incredible. Precious Declaration, Listen, Maybe, Full Circle, Blame. I really love the run of tracks at the end of this album, too, with Giving and In Between, Crowded Head, Everything. And I always kind of thought In Between and Everything sounded a lot the same. They're both kind of mellow tracks, have similar guitar hooks, but I love both tracks just about equally. They're two of my favorite tracks on the album, along with Precious Declaration. Everything. I liked every song on here. And it just really cemented Collective Soul for me, that this is a band that I need to go and collect all the albums, because this really just kind of got me hooked on the band if I wasn't hooked already. So Discipline Breakdown, I'm always going to love this album because it was the first Collective Soul album that I owned, and I still think it's a great album today. And just looking at this cover, this is a little side note, this is like such a 1997 cover. I mean, this album art to me is just like so 97 that it's awesome. So Discipline Breakdown, great album. So not too long after that, I decided to go into the CD store that we had in town here, and I bought myself a copy of Dosage. Now, Dosage is an album that I did have a couple of tracks from. Tremble for My Beloved, Heavy, I think Run I had as well. And I loved all 3 tracks. And from what I could tell online, Dosage seemed to be a pretty popular album, so I decided to pick it up and give it a chance. And despite there being a couple tracks on here that I didn't initially care for, I probably love this album as a whole more than Discipline Breakdown. It was so... This album is so darn near perfect that it's unbelievable. I mean, the tracks that I mentioned, Tremble for My Beloved, Heavy, and Run, I love all 3 of those songs. No More, No Less, I love. Needs is great. Slow. Generate, I've always loved. Compliment, Not the One. I couldn't stand Dandy Life when I first heard it. I hated that song for years, but I've come around on it, and I actually quite like Dandy Life now. And I would even say that I love Dandy Life now. I've really come around on that one. But the one song on here that I've not really ever come around on is Crown. And I don't know what it is about Crown that I just don't care that much for. I just listened to this album, too, the other night, from start to finish, including Crown. And it's still just, whatever reason, it's just not a song that... it's just not a song I can get that into. But still, other than Crown, this album is amazing. It's darn near a perfect record. And it's got a lot of my favorite Collective Soul songs on here. And I remember picking this album up from the CD store and just driving around town with my wife, windows down. It was a nice, beautiful spring day. And to me, I did a video not too long ago on my favorite springtime albums, and I included another Collective Soul album on there. But I could have easily put Dosage on there as well, because Dosage to me just sounds like a gorgeous spring day, gorgeous spring morning, which is exactly what it was when I heard this album for the first time. And I gotta say, this album did not leave my car CD player for a long time after I got it. So, hopping the thrift stores in town, we were in American Rescue Workers, and I found Hints, Allegations, and Things Left Unsaid. So, this is probably not the next album that was on my to-get list, but I wasn't going to pass it up for $1 or $2 or whatever it was. And I was actually pleasantly surprised by it. I don't know that I expected to like it as much as I did. Now, this album, as I've come to find out over the years, that this is actually more of an Ed Roland album than a Collective Soul album, as these were just a bunch of demos that Ed had laying around that they kind of put together. And I think Ed plays most everything on here, if I'm not mistaken. At least I believe that's what I read. And he doesn't get credit for that. I mean, everybody acknowledges David Grohl played everything on the Foo Fighters debut. But if Ed played most everything on this album, he doesn't seem to get the credit for being kind of a multi-talented musician like that. But this is a really good starting point for Collective Soul, I think. Of course, Shine is a great song. Goodnight, Good Guy, I loved right off the bat. And I really love a lot of the songs down the stretch on this album, like Reach, Breathe, Scream, Burning Bridges, all. And Burning Bridges has probably really grown on me to become like my favorite track on here. But I still think this is a great starting point for Collective Soul. They hadn't quite found their sound yet, but this is definitely the roots of a great band right here. So I picked this album up, and I thought it was pretty awesome. So fast forward a little bit, and we're probably into May at this point. And my wife and I were taking a trip with a friend of mine to a little town that's about 2.5 hours away from here. And for the ride, I went to the CD store after work and I picked up Blender. Now, I was always intrigued by Blender. I'm not really exactly sure why, but there's just something about this album that always intrigued me from the get-go. And it was one that I really wanted to pick up after Dosage. And there were a couple songs on here that I did have. I had Skin and Vent. And the first time I ever heard Skin, I was on board from the get-go. I mean, it was just so up-tempo. It was upbeat. It was kind of infectious. It was really making me kind of want to Get Up and Go. And it got to the part in the middle of the song where Ed does the ba-da-da-ba-ba-da-ba-da, and I kind of didn't know what to think of that at first, but after listening to the song 2 or 3 times, and to this day, it's like my favorite part of the song. Vent was like my first real experience with Blender. Blender being such a very unique style, it's almost like an industrial rock album. There's just a lot of interesting things going on in these songs, kind of more depth than a lot of other Collective Soul albums have. And what I mean by that is depth just sonically. I think most Collective Soul albums are very deep in terms of having great deep cuts and whatnot, but there's a lot of stuff going on here sonically, and it's very interesting. And I think Blender may in a lot of ways be their most artistic album. And so I'd heard Vent, and I loved Vent too, like as much as I loved Skin. Those 2 songs to me, they just go together. I can't want to listen to one without the other, and they're 2 of my top 3 favorite Collective Soul songs, actually. Of course, Why Part 2 was one of the songs that really hooked me. And then the rest of this album, I think, just played out very nicely. Songs like 10 Years Later, Boast is a really good rockin' song. Turn Around, I love a lot. I love that piano at the end of the song, too. That's just, such a great touch. I love the cover of You Speak My Language, because that song is so me. I'm definitely one of those people that I often feel like I'm speaking a different language from the rest of the world sometimes, so I can totally get into that song. After All is great. Over Tokyo and Happiness is a rockin' track to close things out with. And I love this album, man. To this day, it's one of my favorite Collective Soul albums, one of my favorite albums of all time. And this will always remind me of that trip and that little town that we went and visited. And every time that I listen to this album, I just want to take a road trip. It just reminds me of it was a nice, beautiful spring day. It wasn't too hot, wasn't cold, just like perfect like early to mid May weather. And we went up to a lake that's outside of the town there, so like now every time that I hear Blender, like I always want to go to a lake or a river or some sort of body of water and just chill. And vice versa, whenever I'm around a lake or whatever I'm on a road trip, I can't not want to listen to Blender. So it's just really kind of cemented itself that way for me, and I just love this album so much. Excuse me. And that album cover, I mean, if Discipline Breakdown is like 1997, this is such a 2000 Y2K album cover. I mean, this almost looks like a boy band album cover. Like, I could totally see the Backstreet Boys doing something like this. And I'm not a Backstreet Boys fan by any means, but I kind of love this cover. I don't know. It's just such a product of its time, man, but I love it. I love the cover. I love the album. Isn't anything about Blender I don't like, so that was a great pickup for me, and still to this day one that I listen to regularly. In fact, it's actually what I have in my CD player right now in the car. So moving along, a couple weeks, maybe a month later, buddy of mine talks me into going and seeing Iron Man 2. And I'm not a big movie buff by any means, but he talked me into going and seeing Iron Man 2 in the theaters. So I went, and after the movie, we went to Walmart, and I picked up Collective Soul 95. Figured it was about time I should pick this album up, as, you know, after all, this album has a lot of their best known tracks. Probably their most popular album. And even though I was familiar with, at this point, The World I Know, December, Gel, I had at some point downloaded Where the River Flows, and I loved that one a lot. The rest of this album really played out well. I love Simple and Untitled. I think it's two great tracks starting the album. Smashing Young Man is a great song and kind of a cool little dig at Billy Corgan. She Gathers Rain has grown on me. Bleed. Collection of Goods and Reunion probably being the two songs that I don't love as much as the rest of the album, but this is still a fantastic album. And I gotta say, the buddy that I was with, that I went to see Iron Man 2 with, he's a Smashing Pumpkins fan, and especially they were his favorite band at this point in time, so it's kind of fun to kind of get Smashing Young Man. So yeah, good album. Collective Soul 95, solid album. So in many ways, the way that Dosage and Blender have become just such springtime albums for me, Afterwards really became a summertime album for me, because we're getting into the summer at this point, and it was a summer day after work. My wife and I went down to the mall, and I picked this up from FYE. And this is another album that I had a lot of songs from already. I had heard New Vibration, What I Can Give You, All That I Know, and Hollywood. And I loved all 4 songs. And playing this album as we were driving back home and kind of taking all the back roads and stuff, windows down, and just good memories. I mean, 2010 was such a hot and cold year for me. I mean, some of the best memories I ever have were in 2010, but I also have a lot of the roughest times I've ever had were also in 2010. So Collective Soul was just that perfect band to see me through that year. Their music is just a perfect representation of the good times I had that year, and it also got me through the hard times. And Ed Roland is such a unique lyricist. I don't think anybody really writes lyrics the way that Ed Roland does. And his lyrics in these songs, on Afterwards, on 95, on Blender, Discipline Breakdown, Dosage, I mean, they were the words that I couldn't speak at that point in time. They were the words and the music that was kind of doing the talking for me. And that's really why a lot of these albums and songs have just come to mean so much to me, you know. I think that's the great thing about music, and a lot of my favorite bands, they just kind of become staples and soundtracks to certain years of my life. And Collective Soul may have been the soundtrack of 2010 to me, but all these years later, I still listen to them, I still love them, I still relate to these songs. And this album, I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here, but this album has my favorite Collective Soul song, which is Persuasion of You. I love the guitar work in that song. As much as good of a guitar player as Ross Childress was, I think Joel really shines in Persuasion of You. I love all the guitar hooks he has, the riffs. It's a pretty heavy song, probably along with New Vibration, the heaviest track on the album. And just love all the guitar hooks, especially the guitar work going on like in the chorus of the song. I think is just what catches me so much. Georgia Girl's awesome as well, Adored. Not a bad song. And this album, along with Blender, I just always go back and forth between these two as to what my favorite Collective Soul album is. And just a lot of good memories listening to this album with the windows down. Good stuff. So at this point, I only had 2 more Collective Soul albums to acquire, and the next one that I picked up was Youth. Now, I did have a handful of songs from Youth by this point. Better Now. I had Feels Like It's Alright. And Counting the Days, I think. There had to have been at least 1 or 2 more, because I just don't remember which ones they were. But for whatever reason, these were the songs that I had from Collective Soul that just didn't grab me the way that songs from Afterwards and Dosage and all these other albums did. I liked them, but they just weren't ones that I became all that particularly crazy about. So when I got the album, I was really hoping that maybe the other songs were like the songs that were gonna really jump out at me. But that didn't really happen, to be honest with you. This is a good album, don't get me wrong. I've heard far worse albums than this, but as far as Collective Soul goes, I just didn't think this one lived up to the other ones, and I still feel that way to this day. I think, you know, songs like There's a Way is really good. I love Him a lot. Perfect to Stay. Counting the Days, like I said, General Attitude's really good. I've never been terribly crazy about Home. I've never been real crazy about Under Heaven's Skies. I've never even been that crazy about Better Now, to be honest with you. They're not bad. They're just not my favorite Collective Soul songs. So I think I was glad to pick this album up. I mean, I wanted to own every Collective Soul album at this point. That was kind of my mission in life at this point in time. But yeah, this one to me just didn't resonate with me quite as much. And even though I do go back to this album, I enjoy it for what it is. It's just never been really one of my favorites. It's always kind of been, along with another one coming up, kind of my least favorite Collective Soul album. But that being said, I don't want to sound like I'm too down on Youth, because in all honesty, Youth is not a bad album. I mean, when you kind of think of the grand scheme of all the CDs that I have in my collection and all the albums that I've heard in my life, Youth is not a bad album. It's just I think all the other Collective Soul albums are just a notch higher. So I picked up Youth. It never did grow on me the way that some of these other ones did, but still, not a bad album at all. And then it took me a little bit to finally collect that last Collective Soul album. It was actually closer to Christmas time, so I went probably from, Youth I probably picked up sometime in July. I want to say it was in July, and then we're kind of going to like the beginning of December here. I think I held out just about that long. So part of it was too, I had a lot of the songs on this album already because I don't know, I just did. And I didn't I didn't want the fun to end, I guess. Maybe that's just the mindset of a music fan and a music collector, but I didn't want the fun of collecting Collective Soul albums to end. So I kind of held out for this one, but when I picked it up, you know, I was familiar with most of this album by that point. Welcome All Again, my favorite song on here for sure. You know, Fuzzy's really cool. Dig, You, Understanding, Staring Down, Love, I think, is a really good song. I think the only two songs I hadn't heard up to this point were My Days and She Does. My Days is probably my least favorite song on the album. She Does is decent. All in all, pretty decent album. I like it a little bit better than Youth, but I don't think I like it quite as much as the other 6. So that's kind of where this album fell in for me. But still, good album nonetheless. And at that point, I had all the Collective Soul albums there were to have. And I was really hoping that since Rabbit album came out in 2009, that maybe in 2011 or 2012 they would put out a new album. But it took a while. I mean, Ed did an album with the Sweet Tea Project in 2013 that dropped. I didn't get that album until a little bit later. But it was all the way until 2015 that they finally dropped See What You Started By Continuing. And I was really, really excited when this album came out. It was my first new Collective Soul album, and I couldn't wait. And this album, this is kind of an outlier to me in the Collective Soul discography. Like, all these other albums, including Youth, like, I think are just very consistent albums. There might be one song maybe that I don't care for, but they're just in general very consistent, steady listens. And I think probably with up to this point, my least favorite Collective Soul song being Crown, and it's at the end of an album, so you can just kind of turn it off. It really kind of shocked me how roller coastery this album was, because I think this album has a lot of great stuff. Hurricane is super, super catchy. I love Exposed. I love Are You the Answer, Contagious, Life, Am I Getting Through, Memories of 2005. A lot of good stuff. A lot of stuff that I think really lives up to those old Collective Soul albums. But this album also has 3 of my least favorite Collective Soul songs of all time, and probably 2 that would wind up in my bottom 5. That being Confession and Tradition, and then throw Without You probably somewhere like in my bottom 10. Just songs that never grew on me. Songs I never cared all that much for. But still, I mean, I went and picked this album up the day that it was released. Kind of had the same... I mean, this album was released in the fall sometime. I don't remember if it was September or October, but it was sometime in the fall of 2015. While you could still sort of roll the windows down, and I remember driving out a nice country road, listening to this album, and I was long past my grocery store job at this point. I had gotten a job at another place, and I had just changed positions within that job, so I had to go away for training for a couple of days, and to get trained on my running a baler, and to then get a forklift certification. And then I come back and started my new position right about the time this album was coming out. So I'm not one that really likes change all that much. Sometimes I struggle with that, but you know, having an album to kind of cling to and sink into can really help you ease the stress, I guess. So I always had that with this album right here. See What You Started By Continuing. Pretty good stuff. And then it seemed like it took forever for them to release another album, that being Blood in 2019. And then what I didn't realize until I was kind of collecting my thoughts for this video is that I have the exact same experience, the exact same first listening experience to these two albums, Blood and Vibrating, 3 years apart. There's a road in town that leads out of town here. It kind of takes you like the back way to the next borough over, and it's probably it's a nice, like, really easy drive. It's like a 40-mile-an-hour. You're kind of going through countryside. There's like farms and stuff. It's just a really scenic drive. It's a simple drive, so it's like you're not doing there's not a lot of in town starting and stopping or anything like that. It's just like a perfect ride, and it's one of my favorite roads to travel on. So we put these albums on the morning before I had to go into work, both times. So we had the exact same ride, exact same road before I had to go into work, listening to both of these albums. So I had the exact same experience, which I think was pretty cool. But my feelings of the albums were totally different. Blood is the other Collective Soul album I never got all that into, much like Youth. Now, don't get me wrong. I think in the grand scheme of things, Blood is not a bad album at all. But compared to other Collective Soul albums, I just don't. To me, it doesn't quite measure up. I do love Right as Rain. I do love Big Sky. Good Place to Start has grown on me, and Crush has grown on me. But otherwise, you just got some songs here that just never really, Now's the Time, Over Me. They're okay. Never was that big under them blues. I love Observation of Thought, but I love the version that's out there on YouTube where Ed's doing an interview with somebody and he just plays a stripped back acoustic version of the song. And I love that. I thought that was like a great song. I thought it fit that very well. And then they just kind of, I don't know, add too much to it on the studio version, I guess. But I don't know. I don't really care for Change. Don't really care that much for Porch Swing. But still, for Collective Soul, not really one of my favorites. But, like I said, Collective Soul doesn't have a bad album. So this is still a pretty good album. It's just toward the bottom of my Collective Soul list. Vibrating I absolutely loved. So I was almost starting to lose hope that Vibrating was ever going to come out, because I remember Blood was supposed to be a double album, and that idea fell through. And I was under the impression that they were going to release Vibrating like the next year. Well, the next year being 2020, and COVID hits and everything's chaotic and nobody knows what they're doing, and this album didn't come out, and then 2021 comes and goes and you didn't hear anything about it. So 2022 I start hearing rumblings about the Collective Soul album coming out, and they dropped the single All Our Pieces, which I thought was fantastic. Love the track, everything about it. Again, it just kind of took me back. All these songs that were like the soundtracks to 2010 for me, All Our Pieces perfectly captured kind of how I was feeling at that point in time. And again, sort of Collective Soul doing the talking for me a little bit. Cut the Cord I thought was killer rockin' opener. Just absolute banger to start this album with. I was really excited also to see that Reason was going to be on the album, because Reason was dropped with a couple tracks from Blood, and I was disappointed that it wasn't on Blood. So I was really stoked that it was going to make this album. And then when the album dropped and we were listening to the album and Take comes on, Take's incredible. I mean, everything about it. Again, lyrics that I can relate to. I think the riffs are really cool, and I love how bait and switch the song is. It almost, every step of the way, I'm waiting for the song to turn into just like this really heavy rockin' track, but it never does. It always goes the other way and becomes melodic, and it kind of bait and switches you, but at the same time, it's so perfect. Like, it's just exactly what the song should do. A lot of interesting guitar work going on with Take. A lot of interesting guitar work going on with Undone. I've really grown to love A Conversation With. Just looking around, Where Do I Go? A lot of good stuff. Really, really love Vibrating. Still, this album came out last August. I'm still digging this album a lot today. And I just read today that they're supposedly working on, I think, 2 albums they have in the works. So I hope they come out sooner rather than later, because I am pumped for some new Collective Soul. So, Collective Soul fans, please let me know in the comments how you got into the band. Share any Collective Soul related stories that you would like. If you're not familiar with Collective Soul, in this video, at any point intrigued you, I would encourage you to go out and check out their music, because I think they're a vastly underrated group. If you like this kind of content, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos like this in the future, and I will catch you next time.